The meeting invite didn't have a subject line, just a time. 9:00 am. That alone told me something was wrong. By 9:12, I was sitting across from Brandon Keene in conference room C, staring at a printed letter with my name on it. The paper was still warm from the printer. He hadn't even bothered to let it cool. "Elena," he said, leaning back like this was routine, "we're making some structural adjustments. I didn't touch the letter yet, I just looked at him. Brandon Keene. New COO. 3 months in. Expensive suits, loud confidence, and the kind of smile that only shows up when someone thinks they're smarter than the room." "What kind of adjustments?" I asked. He slid the paper closer to me. "Compensation realignment. Your role has been expanded in ways that don't align with our current model." That was a careful way of saying they were cutting my salary. I read the number once, then again. It wasn't a small cut. It was the kind of number you use when you want someone to leave on their own. "And my role?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "We're streamlining operations. You'll be transitioning out of your current office. We've already reassigned that space." Of course they had. I nodded slowly like I was processing it, but I wasn't looking at him anymore. I was looking past him, at the binders sitting on the table, thick black, labeled in my handwriting. Vendor capital authorization active. It was closed, unsigned tabs sticking out like bookmarks no one understood. Brandon followed my gaze for half a second, then ignored it. "You'll still be part of the team," he added, "just in a more focused capacity." Focused. That word usually means smaller. I finally picked up the letter. "Elena Marlowe," it read, "Director of Strategic Vendor Finance and Contract Authority." 14 years in that title. Reduced to a paragraph and a new number. "I see," I said. He relaxed a little, like he expected pushback and didn't get it. "There's also a new hire joining us," he continued. "She'll be taking over the office space. Fresh perspective. Faster execution." Of course, there's always a fresh perspective when someone doesn't understand the system they just walked into. I stood up before he could say anything else. "My access?" I asked. "Already updated," he said. "You'll have what you need." That meant I wouldn't. I walked out of the room with the letter in my hand and a strange kind of quiet sitting in my chest. Not panic, not anger, just clarity. If you've ever been in a building long enough, you learn its sounds. The hum of the air system, the delay in the elevator, the way conversations stop when you walk past. That morning, everything sounded sharper. I passed my office. Or what used to be my office. My nameplate was gone. The door was open. Someone else's bag was already inside. Efficient. I didn't stop. I kept walking to my temporary desk, one of those half-height setups near operations. No door, no privacy, no history. I sat down, placed the letter beside my keyboard, and logged in. The system took a second longer than usual. New permissions, reduced access, expected. But then the dashboard loaded. Vendor capital authorization active queue. 12 pending approvals. Total value $95 million. And under authorized signatory, there was still only one name. Mine. Elena Marlowe. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the screen for a long moment. They had cut my salary, they had taken my office, they had rewritten my role. But they hadn't touched the one thing that actually mattered. If you've ever seen a company make a decision so confident it becomes reckless, you already know what this is. So before I tell you what happened next, do me one favor. Pay attention to the details in this story. Because the smallest line in a contract is usually the one that brings everything down. and they missed all of them. I didn't start at Kestrel Infrastructure Group as anything important. No one does. 14 years earlier, I was just another analyst sitting in a corner office that didn't even have a window. My job was simple on paper: track vendor payments, flag delays, and make sure contracts matched what finance thought they said. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was where everything broke. Back then, Kestrel didn't have a system. It had fragments. Different teams signed different deals. Vendors had separate terms. Payments moved through layers of approvals that didn't talk to each other. And when something went wrong, no one knew where to look. That's where I came in. Not because I was brilliant, because I was patient. I started mapping everything. Every contract, every payment condition, every exception clause buried on page 37 that no one read after signing. I built spreadsheets that turned into models, models that turned into processes, processes that turned into something no one else wanted to manage, but everyone depended on. Over time, I became the bridge. Legal would draft the contracts, finance would allocate the capital, operations would execute the projects, and sprats, I made sure all three actually worked together. If a vendor didn't get paid, I knew why. If a project stalled, I knew where. If a contract had a flaw, I caught it before it cost us millions. There was one year, I remember it clearly, when a port expansion deal almost collapsed because of a payment timing issue. $30 million at risk because two departments had different interpretations of the same clause. I fixed it in one night. No announcement, no credit. Just a quiet correction that kept the company moving. That was my job. Invisible until it wasn't. A few years later, after a compliance scare that almost triggered an external audit, the board approved a new structure. They called it the Vendor Capital Authorization Framework. Centralized approvals, clear thresholds, one accountable point for high-value disbursements. That point became me. Not my department, not my team, me. It wasn't about power, it was about control, making sure nothing moved unless it was correct. And for years it worked. Vendors trusted the system because it was consistent. Finance trusted it because it was accurate. Operations trusted it because it didn't fail. But leadership? They saw it as back office, support, something that just worked, until someone like Brandon came in and decided anything quiet must be replaceable. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and my archive drive plugged in. I don't keep things out of habit. I keep them because systems fail when memory disappears. I opened the original framework documents, board approvals, vendor agreements, authorization clauses. Page after page of language I had helped shape. Clear, specific, binding. And there it was. My name. Not a role, not a title. Elena Marlowe, designated signatory for capital disbursements exceeding threshold limits. I read it once, then again. Then I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath, because now I wasn't wondering anymore. I knew. They hadn't removed me from the system, they had removed themselves from me. And that kind of mistake doesn't show up immediately. It waits until the moment something needs to move, and then everything stops. The first notification came through at 6:42 the next morning. Subject line: Disbursement request pending authorization. I didn't open it right away. I already knew what it was. Instead, I made coffee, sat at the same spot in my kitchen, let the quiet stretch for a minute longer than usual. Then I opened my laptop. The system loaded the same way it always had. No errors, no warning, just a queue. 12 requests yesterday. 17 now. The top one was marked urgent. A $12 million release tied to a port expansion in Rotterdam, the kind of project that doesn't pause. Ships don't wait. Contracts don't bend. At least, they're not supposed to. I clicked into the request. Everything was in order. Vendor verified. Milestones met. Finance had cleared the allocation. All it needed was authorization. My authorization. I scrolled to the bottom. Final signatory, Elena Marlowe, still there, unchanged. I leaned back and let that settle, because this wasn't a glitch. This was structure. Years ago, when we built the Vendor Capital Authorization Framework, we weren't trying to make anything complicated. We were trying to make it safe. Kestrel had grown too fast. Too many vendors. Too many contracts. Too many people making decisions without seeing the full picture. So we centralized it. Every major disbursement above a set threshold required one final check. Not from a team, not from a rotating list, from a named authority. Me. At the time, it made sense. I was already reviewing everything. I understood how the pieces connected. I knew where risk lived. The board approved it without much resistance. They had just watched us nearly lose a major contract over a misaligned clause. They wanted control, and I gave it to them. Clean, enforceable, and very specific. That was the part Brandon never read. Because if he had, he would have noticed something simple. You can reassign a role. You can cut a salary. You can even remove someone from the org chart. But unless you formally amend a contract, the name inside it doesn't change. And there were dozens of contracts, each one tied to different vendors, different regions, different timelines, all of them pointing back to the same line. Final authorization required, Elena Marlowe. Not director, not authorized personnel, not designated role, me. I checked the rest of the queue. Another request. $8.5 million. Rail expansion in Poland. Another. $5.2 million. Cold storage upgrade in Singapore. 17 requests. All valid, all ready, all waiting. I didn't approve anything, not yet. Instead, I opened the framework document itself, the original version. I knew what it said, but I wanted to read it again with fresh eyes. Clause 7.3, Capital Disbursement Authority. All disbursements exceeding defined thresholds require written authorization from the designated signatory. In the absence of such authorization, funds shall not be released under any circumstances. No exceptions, no workaround, no alternate path. I closed the document and went back to the dashboard. 17 pending approvals, total value now just over $108 million, growing. I could already imagine what was happening inside Kestrel. Finance teams refreshing their screens, operations asking why payments hadn't cleared, emails starting to stack up. At first, they would assume delay. Then, system lag. Then, miscommunication. It would take time before someone asked the right question. Who signs these? And when they found the answer, it wouldn't make sense. Because I was no longer visible. I closed my laptop, not to avoid it, but because I didn't need to watch it unfold in real time. The system wasn't broken. It was doing exactly what it was designed to do, protect itself. And until someone realized what they had disconnected, nothing would move. A second notification buzzed on my phone. Another request added to the queue. I didn't open it. I just placed the phone face down on the table and let the silence return. Because the first crack had already formed. They just hadn't heard it yet. By midweek, the number of pending approvals had doubled. I still hadn't signed a single one. Not out of spite, out of precision. There's a difference. I spent that morning organizing everything I would need if this escalated, which it would. Contracts first. I pulled every active vendor agreement tied to the framework, sorted them by region, value, and urgency, not because I didn't trust the system, but because I trusted patterns. Patterns tell you where pressure builds first. Then I reviewed the authorization language in each one. Every contract had slight variations, but the core clause was identical. My name. My authority. No substitute listed, no contingency. That wasn't an accident. That was intentional design. Back when we built this system, we were trying to prevent exactly this kind of confusion. Too many hands create too many risks. So we narrowed it down. One final gate. Me. I opened my email next. No messages from Brandon. Not yet. But there were internal threads I still had visibility into. Operations teams asking finance why payments hadn't cleared. Finance asking compliance if there was a hole. Compliance hadn't responded. That told me something important. They were checking. I decided to help them, just enough. I drafted a short email to the compliance lead. Subject: clarification on current signatory status. No emotion, no accusation. Just one question. Can you confirm whether there have been any formal amendments to the Vendor Capital Authorization Framework regarding designated signatory authority? I hit send and waited. It took less than an hour. Hi, Alina. No amendments have been recorded. You remain the designated signatory under the current framework. Clean. Direct. Documented. I saved the email. Then I forwarded it to my personal archive. Not because I needed proof. Because I always keep proof. Next, I called someone I trusted. Not inside Kestrel. A legal contact I had worked with years ago when we first structured the framework. I didn't explain everything. I didn't need to. I just asked one question. If a company removes someone operationally but doesn't amend the contracts that name them as signatory, what happens? There was a pause on the other end. Then, a quiet answer. Nothing moves without them. Exactly. Can they bypass it? I asked. Not without breaching contract terms, he said. And if they try, vendors can stop work immediately. That was all I needed. I thanked him and ended the call. Back at my laptop, the queue had grown again. 24 pending approvals now. Some marked urgent, some marked critical. Red flags starting to appear. I still didn't touch them. Because this wasn't about stopping the company. It was about letting the company experience the structure it had chosen to ignore. There's a moment in every system failure where people realize the issue isn't technical, it's architectural. We weren't there yet, but we were getting close. I closed the dashboard and leaned back in my chair. For 14 years, I had kept everything moving quietly. Now I was doing the same thing, just in reverse, and the silence was starting to get expensive. By Thursday morning, the silence inside Kestrel had turned into noise. Not loud, not public, but sharp enough that you could feel it moving through the walls. I still had limited access to internal channels, and what I could see told me everything I needed to know. Operations was confused, finance was irritated, compliance was quiet, and Brandon Keene was doubling down. There was a leadership call that afternoon. I wasn't invited, but I knew how those calls went. I had sat in enough of them to hear the rhythm even from the outside. He opened with confidence. We're seeing minor delays tied to process realignment, he said, according to a transcript someone forwarded me. Nothing structural. Nothing structural. I almost smiled, because the only thing this was structural. He introduced the new hire on that same call. A polished voice, quick sentences, words like efficiency and modern flow used like they meant something on their own. "This is the direction we're moving in," Brandon said. "Less dependency. More agility, less dependency." That word hung in my mind for a long time, because dependency isn't something you remove by saying it out loud. It's something you understand, or you break. By the end of the call, teams were already trying to fix the problem. Finance attempted to reroute approvals through secondary channels. Denied. The system didn't recognize them. Operations tried pushing vendors to wait. That worked for a few hours. Then the questions started coming back. Real questions. When will funds clear? Why is this delayed? Who is authorizing this? And that last one kept coming up. I saw an internal email chain where someone finally asked it directly. Who holds final signatory on these contracts now? There was no answer. Not a clear one anyway, just a few guesses, a few assumptions. No confirmation. Because no one had checked the actual documents. Later that evening, Brandon sent out a company-wide update. Short. Controlled. We are transitioning legacy authorization processes into a more dynamic approval model. Temporary delays may occur. Legacy. That word again. I wondered if he had ever read a contract in full, or if he thought language changed just because leadership did. By Friday, the tone had shifted. Less confident, more urgent. Vendors were no longer waiting quietly. They were asking for timelines, and when they didn't get them, they started sending notices. Formal ones. I saw the first of those come through just before lunch. Subject: request for clarification, payment delay. It was from one of our largest infrastructure partners. Direct, professional, but firm. Please confirm the status of pending disbursements and provide expected authorization timeline. Translation: we're watching. I knew what would come next if they didn't get an answer, because I had written those clauses too. Delay triggers, pause rights, escalation pathways, all built to protect the vendor and force accountability on our side. I closed the email and sat back. Brandon still thought this was an internal adjustment. A process issue, something that could be fixed with another meeting. But the system didn't care about meetings, it cared about signatures. And without mine, everything he was promising was already starting to slip. The first real break didn't come from inside the company, it came from outside. Monday morning, 8:17 a.m. I was halfway through my coffee when my phone lit up with a notification I hadn't seen in years. Vendor status update, operations suspended. I didn't need to open it to know which one. But I did anyway. Rotterdam. The same $12 million disbursement that had been sitting at the top of my queue for days. The message was short. Due to non-payment within agreed timelines, project operations are hereby paused pending resolution. That was it. No emotion. No threats, just action. I exhaled slowly and set my phone down. Because once one vendor moves like that, others follow. Not immediately, but soon. And inside Kestrel, the effect would be instant. Projects tied to that port would stall, logistics schedules would shift, deadlines would break, and suddenly what looked like a delay becomes a disruption. I opened my laptop. The dashboard was no longer quiet, 31 pending approvals, several marked critical, red indicators across multiple regions, and now, attached to some of them, were escalation flags. Finance had started marking risk. That meant someone was paying attention. My inbox confirmed it. 3 emails from internal teams, all variations of the same question. Elena, are you still handling these approvals? I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't want to, because timing matters. Then came the fourth email. From legal. Subject, urgent, authorization clarification required. I opened it. Elena, we are reviewing current disbursement constraints. Can you confirm your role in the authorization chain under the Vendor Capital Authorization Framework? There it was. The question that should have been asked before they changed anything. I replied simply, yes, I remain the designated signatory under the current framework. No amendments have been executed. I hit send. And just like that, the issue stopped being operational. It became legal. Inside Kestrel, that shift would feel like pressure. Not loud, but heavy, because once legal gets involved, assumptions stop, and documents start. I imagined the meeting that followed, finance explaining the blocked payments, compliance confirming no changes, legal pulling up the contracts, and Brandon realizing slowly that this wasn't something he could talk his way through. By midday, another notification came through. Second vendor escalation, different region, same issue, non-payment, pause notice pending. The pattern was forming, and patterns, once visible, spread fast. I still hadn't approved anything. Not a single request. But I had reviewed every one, every contract, every clause, every condition. Because when this came back to me, and it would, I needed to be exact, not emotional, not reactive, exact. By late afternoon, I got the message I had been expecting, not an email, a direct call from legal. Elena, the voice said, measured but tight, we need to speak with you. Immediately, I looked at the dashboard one more time. 34 pending approvals, total value now approaching $120 million, all waiting on one thing, my name. I'm available, I said calmly, and for the first time since that meeting in Conference Room C. They were the ones asking. The boardroom felt colder than I remembered, not because of the air conditioning, because of the shift in tone. A week ago, I had been called into a conference room and quietly reduced. Now I was being asked to walk into the highest room in the building. Same company, completely different energy. I arrived 5 minutes early, old habit. No one stopped me this time. No badge issue. No confusion at reception. They were expecting me. When I stepped inside, the room was already full. Legal on one side, finance on the other, 2 board members at the far end, and Brandon Keene standing near the screen, trying to look in control of something that clearly wasn't. He glanced at me, just for a second. Not confident anymore, just aware. Elena, one of the board members said, gesturing to a seat. Thank you for coming in, I nodded and sat down. Calm, straight posture, no folder in front of me. I didn't need one. Legal started. We're currently facing a disruption across multiple vendor disbursements, the lead counsel said. We've reviewed the Vendor Capital Authorization Framework, and we need clarity on current signatory authority. I let the silence sit for half a second before answering. I am the designated signatory, I said. There have been no amendments to that structure. There was a quiet shift in the room. Subtle, but real. Finance spoke next. Is there a reason approvals have not been processed? I looked at him, steady. I have not been asked to process them, I said. That landed exactly how it needed to. Because it wasn't defensive. It was factual. Brandon stepped in quickly. We're transitioning away from legacy dependencies, he said. This is part of a broader operational shift. Legal cut him off. Operational changes do not override contractual obligations, she said, without raising her voice. That was the moment, the exact moment the room stopped being his. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The board member at the end of the table leaned forward slightly. "Elena," he said, "can you explain in simple terms what is required for these disbursements to proceed?" I nodded. "Each contract above the defined threshold requires final authorization from the named signatory," I said. "That authorization has not been provided." "And without it?" he asked. "Funds cannot be released," I said. "Under any circumstances." He held my gaze for a second longer. "And the impact?" I didn't rush. "Vendors have the right to pause operations," I said. "Some already have. Others will follow. Delays will compound. Penalties may apply depending on contract terms." No emotion, just structure. That's what made it heavier. Brandon tried again. "We can assign temporary authority," he said. "There are ways to work around." "There aren't," legal said, flat. Another silence. This one long, because now the truth was sitting in the middle of the table and no one could move it. The board member turned back to me. What would it take to restore normal operations? That was the question. Not what went wrong, not who's responsible. What would it take? I answered carefully. "Formal reinstatement of my authority," I said. "Clear acknowledgement of the existing framework and immediate alignment across legal, finance, and operations to process the backlog correctly. No demands, no emotion, just conditions." He nodded slowly. Then he looked at Brandon. No anger, no raised voice, just disappointment. "We should have caught this," he said. Brandon didn't respond. Because there wasn't a response that would fix it. The board began speaking quietly among themselves. Not for long. They didn't need time. The structure was already clear. By the time I stood up to leave, nothing had been officially announced, but the shift was complete. And for the first time since that morning in Conference Room C, I wasn't the one being managed. The call came the next morning. Short, direct. "Brandon Keene has been relieved of his position," legal said. "Effective immediately. No details, no explanation. There didn't need to be one. The system had already explained everything." An hour later, I was back in the same building, same floors, same glass walls, but the way people looked at me had changed. Not dramatically, just correctly. I was escorted into a smaller meeting room this time. Legal, finance, and one board representative present. No theatrics, just resolution. "We'd like to reinstate your position," the board rep said, "and move forward as quickly as possible." I nodded once. "I'm open to that," I said. "With adjustments." He expected that. "What kind of adjustments?" he asked. "Clear contractual protection of the signatory role," I said. "No structural changes without formal amendment, and direct reporting alignment to the board on all capital authorization matters." I paused, then added one more. "And compensation that reflects the actual scope of responsibility. No negotiation tone, just clarity." They agreed faster than I expected. Because now they understood what had been sitting quietly inside their own system. This wasn't a role. It was a control point. We finalized everything that afternoon. Updated agreements. Written confirmation. Full reinstatement of authority. Then I went back to my desk. Not my old office. I didn't ask for it back. I didn't need it. The system mattered more than the room. I logged in and opened the dashboard. 37 pending approvals, each one reviewed already, each one waiting. I started signing, one by one, no rush, no hesitation, just precision. Rotterdam first, then Poland, then Singapore. Each approval released a chain reaction on the other side, payments moving, vendors resuming, projects restarting, the system coming back to life. Not because it was fixed, because it was reconnected. By the end of the day, the queue was clear, the silence was gone, and Kestrel was moving again. That evening, I walked out of the building a little later than usual. The lights were still on in most offices, people working, catching up, recovering. I paused for a second near the lobby, looked back once. Not at the offices, not at the people, at the structure behind it all, because that's what they had almost broken. Not me, just the thing that made everything work. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder and walked out. Calm, steady, exactly the way I had walked in for 14 years. Just with a different weight now. And if you've ever been the person holding something a company doesn't fully understand, you already know how this ends. So if this story felt familiar in any way, stay sharp, because the people who look replaceable are usually the ones keeping everything from falling apart.